Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Cleveland torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city, and the detective who obsessed over him. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. Between 1934 and 1938, someone was dissecting human beings in Cleveland, Ohio. Not killing them in the course of robbery or passion, but cutting them apart with a skill that suggested surgical or butchering expertise, separating heads from bodies, removing organs, dismembering limbs, and then depositing the pieces in Cleveland's hobo shantytown of Kingsbury Run and along the city's lakefront. 12 victims were identified, though investigators believed the real total was higher. Most were decapitated. Most were unidentified, nameless drifters and transients, the invisible population of Depression-era Cleveland. The killer, dubbed the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run by the Cleveland press, was never caught, never identified, and to this day has no confirmed identity. And the detective assigned to catch him was Eliot Ness, the same Eliot Ness who had brought down Al Capone in Chicago, who spent the rest of his career haunted by the case he couldn't close. The murders began in September 1934 with the discovery of the Lady of the Lake, a woman's torso, badly decomposed, found on the shore of Lake Erie. In September 1935, 2 decapitated male bodies were found in Kingsbury Run, a ravine that served as a campsite for Cleveland's homeless. They had been killed and decapitated with such surgical precision that the city's coroner, Samuel Gerber, commented that the perpetrator must have extensive anatomical knowledge. Over the next 3 years, parts of 12 victims would be found scattered across Cleveland, in vacant lots, in the river, in trash cans, in packing crates. The killer sometimes embalmed the victims post-mortem. In at least 2 cases, the decapitation appeared to have been performed while the victim was still alive. Eliot Ness, appointed Cleveland's safety director in 1935, took personal charge of the investigation and personally conducted some of the most significant interviews with suspects. He became increasingly obsessed with a single wealthy suspect, a man known to historians as Francis Sweeney, who failed a polygraph test twice and was committed to a psychiatric hospital by his own family at roughly the time the murders ceased. Ness believed Sweeney was the butcher. He could never prove it. The murders stopped. Sweeney remained in and out of institutions for the rest of his life and sent Ness taunting postcards until Ness's death in 1957. The butcher killed at least 12 people, dismembered them with surgical skill, and then simply stopped. The case remains open. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Amateur investigation of cold cases has undergone a revolution in the digital age. What once required physical access to evidence rooms, courthouse archives, and retired detectives now requires, in many cases, only an internet connection and a willingness to spend several hundred hours reading. Online communities dedicated to specific cases have grown to tens of thousands of members, coordinating the analysis of evidence across continents and time zones, cross-referencing witness accounts, and applying analytical frameworks drawn from criminology, forensic accounting, and intelligence analysis. This democratization of investigation has produced real results. Amateur researchers have identified previously overlooked evidence in multiple high-profile cases. Citizen DNA investigations have generated viable leads that professional investigators subsequently pursued. Open-source intelligence techniques, originally developed for geopolitical analysis, have been applied to cold cases with unexpected success, identifying locations from historical photographs, tracking financial transactions through public records, and mapping suspect movements through odd documents. But amateur investigation has also produced harm. Innocent people have been named online as suspects by communities whose enthusiasm outran their evidence. Families of victims have been subjected to intrusive and sometimes harassing contact from self-appointed investigators. Evidence has been disturbed by unauthorized site visits. The power of collective human intelligence, when applied to genuine mystery, is remarkable. The question is whether it can be channeled in ways that help rather than harm the living people caught in the blast radius of historical crimes. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Cleveland torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city, and the detective who obsessed over him is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Cleveland torso murders are officially attributed to an unknown perpetrator and span a period from 1934 to approximately 1938, though some researchers place the likely beginning earlier and the possible end later. The 12 officially recognized victims include both male and female individuals ranging in age from approximately 25 to 45. Most victims were found decapitated, with the head often discovered separately from the body or not found at all. Most victims were unidentified. Only 2 of the 12 were ever positively identified. The population of victims drawn from Cleveland's transient homeless community meant that many had no family or social connections to report them missing. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen. Instruments malfunction. Researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered Coroner Samuel Gerber, who conducted the autopsies on all 12 officially recognized victims, consistently noted that the decapitations and dismemberments were performed with considerable anatomical knowledge and precision. The cuts were clean, made with a large, sharp instrument, and showed an understanding of where joints separate, suggesting training in medicine, surgery, or butchering. Gerber estimated that the perpetrator required 30-45 minutes per body to perform the level of dismemberment observed. Some bodies showed evidence of chemical treatment after death, possibly to slow decomposition or eliminate trace evidence. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. Eliot Ness was appointed Cleveland's Director of Public Safety in December 1935 and took personal interest in the torso case beginning in 1936. Ness assembled a team of investigators separate from the regular detective bureau and pursued the case outside normal departmental channels. His primary focus eventually concentrated on Francis Edward Sweeney, a physician and former congressman's cousin who was an alcoholic and had a documented history of erratic behavior. Sweeney submitted to polygraph testing in 1938 in a secret hotel room arranged by Ness and reportedly failed the test twice, specifically on questions about the murders. Ness considered Sweeney his leading suspect, but had no physical evidence linking him to the crimes. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, in August 1938, Ness made a controversial decision that permanently damaged his reputation in Cleveland. He ordered the destruction of the shantytown of Kingsbury Run and He arrested over 60 homeless men for questioning. The action reflected his frustration with an investigation that had produced no arrests, and it was widely criticized as punishing the victim's community rather than catching the killer. Shortly after the raid, the torso murders stopped. Whether this was because the killer was disrupted, moved away, or simply stopped for other reasons is unknown. The final confirmed Cleveland torso murder occurred in August 1938. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of Francis Sweeney entered the Sandusky Veterans Administration Hospital for psychiatric treatment in July 1938, the same month that Ness was conducting his secret polygraph sessions with him. Sweeney's voluntary commitment, or commitment by his family, coincided almost exactly with the cessation of the torso murders. He remained institutionalized, with periods of release for much of the rest of his life. He began sending postcards to Eliot Ness in the late 1940s and continued sending them until Ness's death in 1957. The postcards were taunting in nature, sometimes including clippings of murder news stories. Ness kept every postcard. They are now preserved in the Western Reserve Historical Society. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: 2 women found in the Youngstown, Pennsylvania area in the early 1940s, and another set of victims discovered in 1950 in a boxcar in Pennsylvania have been attributed by some researchers to the Mad Butcher, suggesting the murders may have continued after 1938, when the perpetrator potentially moved away from Cleveland. If these attributions are correct, the total victim count is significantly higher than 12. Additionally, some researchers, including Stephen Nickel, have argued that a series of Lady of the Lake type murders in the 1930s through the 1950s along the eastern U.S. rail corridor may have been committed by the same individual, suggesting a mobile killer who operated over a much larger geographic area. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation, and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Cleveland torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city, and the detective who obsessed over him. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Francis Sweeney theory is the theory Eliot Ness himself endorsed, and that has been most extensively developed by subsequent researchers. Sweeney had the medical knowledge to perform the surgical dismemberments, a history of violence and erratic behavior, a plausible geographic connection to the crime scenes, and most significantly, reportedly failed a polygraph test on questions about the murders. His voluntary institutionalization coinciding with the end of the murders and his subsequent taunting behavior toward Ness are interpreted by proponents as strong circumstantial evidence. Critics note that polygraph evidence is inadmissible and unreliable, and that no physical evidence has ever linked Sweeney to any specific crime scene. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the medical professional theory, which partially overlaps with the Sweeney theory, holds that the killer's anatomical skill indicates medical training, either surgical or pathological, but does not specifically identify Sweeney as the perpetrator. This theory has been developed by researchers who believe that a 1930s Cleveland physician with alcohol problems, access to the homeless community, and suitable knowledge could have committed the murders without being the specific individual Ness suspected. Cleveland had hundreds of physicians in the 1930s, and the investigative focus on Sweeney may have prematurely narrowed the search. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the multiple killer theory, proposed by a minority of researchers, argues that not all 12 officially recognized torso murders were committed by the same perpetrator. The first two victims in 1934-35 may have been killed and dismembered by one individual, with subsequent victims being the work of a copycat who took advantage of the notoriety of the original crimes. Under this model, identifying the Mad Butcher as a single individual is a framing error, and the murders represented two or more perpetrators whose crimes were conflated by investigators and media coverage into a single serial killer narrative. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Cleveland torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city, and the detective who obsessed over him does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the physical evidence from the torso murders is largely negative, defined by what was not found rather than what was. No confirmed murder location was ever identified despite intensive searches of the Kingsbury Run area. No weapon was recovered. No fingerprints or biological trace evidence from the perpetrator were identified using the technology available in the 1930s. This absence of physical evidence connecting any suspect to the crimes is precisely why Ness could not prosecute Sweeney despite his conviction of Sweeney's guilt. The case is an example of how physical evidence constraints, rather than investigative failure, can make a murder series permanently unsolvable. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the taunting postcards sent by Sweeney to Ness are a form of behavioral evidence rather than physical evidence. Ness preserved them, and they have been analyzed by criminal psychologists. The postcards are consistent with the behavior of a killer who enjoyed the intellectual superiority of remaining uncaught, which criminologists have associated with organized killers who view themselves as smarter than investigators. However, postcards from a mentally ill man are not proof of murder, and Sweeney's psychiatric history means that alternative interpretations, delusional identification with the killer, morbid obsession with the case, cannot be excluded. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed Coroner Gerber's consistent assessment of the killer's anatomical expertise is the strongest positive physical evidence pointing toward a professional with medical or butchering training. The level of skill documented in the autopsies is inconsistent with an unskilled individual acting impulsively and is more consistent with practiced, systematic knowledge of human anatomy. This narrows the suspect pool significantly and supports focusing investigative attention on individuals with professional anatomical knowledge. When combined with the geographic focus on Cleveland and the specific social access to the transient population, this evidence profile is highly consistent with a physician or former physician operating in the city. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Cleveland torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city, and the detective who obsessed over him. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Cleveland Torso murders remain one of the most analyzed unsolved serial killing cases in American history. The case received renewed academic attention in the 2000s when researcher James Battle published a comprehensive study arguing for Francis Sweeney's guilt, followed by James Jesson Battle's 2001 book, In the Wake of the Butcher, which made the most detailed case yet for Sweeney as the perpetrator. The Western Reserve Historical Society holds Ness's personal files on the case, including the taunting postcards, which have been examined by behavioral scientists who have generally supported the interpretation that they were written by the killer. Modern forensic DNA technology could potentially be applied to the Cleveland Torso murders if biological material from any crime scene or victim is available in museum or archival collections. The Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office holds some materials from the original autopsies, and periodic discussions about testing these materials have occurred without yet producing results. The case is regularly cited in criminological literature as an example of the effect of victim selection on investigative outcomes. The butcher's choice to prey on Cleveland's homeless and transient population meant that most victims were unknown and unmissed, creating exactly the conditions for a killer to operate without triggering the community response that identifies and stops most serial murderers. The killer knew his environment. He selected his victims carefully, and he has never been conclusively identified. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Cleveland Torso murders, the Mad Butcher who terrorized a city and the detective who obsessed over him, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Cleveland Torso murders ultimately reveal. LS is not just a historical puzzle, it is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process, and the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.